With us now from Richmond, Virginia, is Elliott Fullmer. He's a political science professor at Randolph-Macon College and the author of Tuesday's Gone, America's Early Voting Revolution. It is interesting, isn't it, that early vote? What does it say to you?
Well, it says to me that early voting has expanded dramatically in most U.S. states, and it's gotten easier and easier to get your ballots early in by mail and in person, and that Americans like it. You know, ever since early voting really came on board in the late 1980s, early 1990s, it's just continued to expand because it's convenient. And especially with Election Day being a Tuesday, people want to get their ballots in early. And there's a lot of enthusiasm on both sides in this election. And we're seeing that with the early voting numbers.
And I guess the big irony of Donald Trump railing against early voting is that his campaign have actively been pushing for early voting this year. And we're seeing that it has been changing Republican voting behavior in this election. How do you see that playing out on Election Day itself? And do you think that makes it less likely for us to see something like the red mirage, which is, of course, what we saw in 2020?
Potentially, for sure. I think by some estimates, Republicans only comprised about 30% of the early vote in 2020. That number looks to be closer to 45%, at least in the states that have voter registration that we can track. So there's a good chance, I think, that when those early numbers come in on Tuesday night, you're not going to see that massive early lead. But of course, this varies. This varies by state. It varies by early voting policy. So in general, I think you're right, but you have to look at it state by state as well.
We've seen Kamala Harris speak to unity in these last few days, really looking to the idea that if she becomes president, she'll represent all Americans. Donald Trump is going in a different direction, isn't he? A lot of his language very provocative, very divisive, very much speaking to his base. What do you think his strategy is there?
Well, I think he's never been a conventional candidate in terms of how he conducts himself during the campaign, and especially the way he's closing. Normally, this is a point where you would think a candidate would want to win those final votes in the middle, would want to have your main rival in the primaries, Nikki Haley, out campaigning with you to try to get those weary Republicans on board in the key states. But that's never been his brand, and I don't think we should be surprised that that's how he's conducting himself at the end of this campaign, his third now. He's trying to mobilize his base, and there's good evidence that they are pretty energized. The question is that enough? Is that enough in the key states? And we'll just have to wait and see.
I think the big shock of the last 24 hours has been the Iowa poll. And we were hearing a little bit earlier there that this poll showed a big turnout for Harris among women, specifically older women who are politically independent. What is your feeling as to whether that is a trend we may see play out elsewhere at this stage?
Well, this is a poll that's very well regarded. It's been very accurate the last few election cycles, and therefore I take it very seriously. With that said, it's one survey, and there are many, many polls coming out every day. And we always have to recognize that they have margins of error, and we shouldn't glean too much from any one survey. With that said, if this poll is an indication of broader voting behavior and intentions in the Midwest generally, then it could be great news for Vice President Harris, even if she ultimately can't win a state like Iowa, which really has trended Republican the last decade. If that tells us something about the electorate in neighboring states like Wisconsin, Michigan, that might be good news for her. But again, I would be very cautious about any one survey and its predictive capability at this stage in the election.
I know. We so have to be cautious, don't we, in the next 24 hours?
Polls have been wrong.
We want to read and glean something from it, don't we? Elliott Fullmer, appreciate your thoughts at this stage. Thanks very much.
Absolutely.